All right. Thanks very much, Jane. And it's a pleasure to be here. Today, in 15 minutes, I'm going to try to forecast the future of where seafood sales will be heading. In Australia, a couple of years ago, actually, one of my best memories was sitting in a small seafood factory where one of the owners said to me that seafood will never be sold online. He actually said a few other choice words to me that I can't repeat right now. But what's actually happened is that things that used to seem quite impossible more and more seem inevitable. And in the midst of the last, I would say, 24 months, in China at the very least, we are in the middle of a very significant shift in the way consumers are discovering seafood, purchasing seafood, and also experiencing seafood. What's driven that predominantly is a huge explosion of new online platforms. These platforms such as GFresh, which you see right now, as well as some of the other consumer-facing platforms, have really changed the way that both sellers and buyers of seafood will engage. To demonstrate that, this is a graph of the total sales of fresh food on online platforms in China. As you can see, in 2012, only 4 billion RMB was transacted online. However, forecasts for 2017 year-end is 150 billion RMB. Just in 2016 alone, that had increased year-on-year roughly 80%. So that kind of growth is a sign of just how much of this transition is happening at the speed at which it's happening. So what this all means, of course, is that buyers can now find seafood products or seafood suppliers. They can compare them online in a very transparent way, and they can purchase that seafood completely through their mobile devices. As I said before, there are two main kinds of platforms in China. There's the B2B online platforms, and there's the B2C. And I'll tackle both of them in that sequence. The first is the B2B, and that's where GFresh operates. So this is the traditional sales and distribution model if you were an Australian exporter. You're on the left there, and your buyers in China are on the right, but you couldn't get to them directly. And when I mean buyers, I'm typically talking about your end wholesale buyers, which are either retailers or restaurants. And because you couldn't get to them directly, whether it be because of the minimum order that you have is maybe too high for a small retailer or restaurant to pick up, you had to go through this very convoluted chain of players in the middle. And you start with the supplier, again, on the left, and then there's brokers and agents and traders who broker those kind of deals. And then it goes to an importer or an import agent. Then that goes down to a distributor, and then down to the wholesalers, and eventually it arrives at the restaurant. Now, through that process, everyone's taking their cut, 50 cents here, $1 there. Products are going to be sent to different tanks where they're held, and the quality is diminishing. And overall, it's not a very efficient nor transparent process. In fact, a lot of products from Australia going into China was actually going through the gray channel. They're actually being smuggled in. And that's a terrible scenario where you have probably the most premium products in the world actually being put into suitcases and smuggled across the border. But that's all changing because of the great work of industry and free trade agreements kicking in. More and more direct sales will happen. But this is what the current model looks like. So in order to create a platform, we at least think you need three key ingredients. You need the ability for buyers and sellers to interact directly through an online platform, an online marketplace. You need, once the transaction occurs, you need to have a way to actually deliver those goods to the end buyers directly. And lastly, you need a payment system that eliminates some of the transaction risk that you would have because of this model. So tackling the first one, how do you trade directly? Well, through our online platform, the buyers can buy a minimum of 1 box. So a restaurant can buy 1 box. And the platform automatically combines those orders to meet the minimum order of the supplier in Australia. So you don't have to go through all these middlemen. The platform combines everything for you. And through this way, the supplier can still send as if it's one transaction, but what's actually happening is that the platform separates and distributes it out. So the benefits for a supplier, of course, is very clear. They can now sell direct to thousands of restaurants or retailers in China. And they can reach retailers or restaurants in all the major Tier 1 and increasingly Tier 2 Chinese cities. And lastly, of course, there's no middlemen. So there's no markups, and it's completely free to use GFresh. For buyers, it gets even better, because now you have a restaurant, and they're able to discover the entirety of the world's seafood online through their mobile device, and they can actually compare them to find out who's a good supplier, who's a bad supplier, look at average mortalities or average quality issues, and be able to select that. Then they can buy $1 at the same price as if they were China's largest importer. And they can place that order and have that order delivered to their door without going through any retanking facilities within 24 hours. So that's the pitch here to the buyer. And that all is great, but it's not great if you can't actually deliver the goods to the buyers. So for GFresh, at least, we have our own in-house customs clearance team who works very closely with customs. We're able to clear goods as quickly, or at least I would say faster than anyone else can in Shanghai, for instance. We have our own integrated cold chain logistics solution. So we have a distribution center at the airport where we receive the goods, we separate it, we deliver it in a fleet of refrigerated vehicles. These are all GPS tracked and temperature tracked, and it arrives directly to the buyer without any retanking. And this is all part of the standard GFresh solution. In addition to that, of course, you have the inspection service, which verifies the quality once it arrives. And lastly, of course, you have to get paid. Now, this used to be a very sensitive issue for a lot of Australian exporters. They'd fly to China all the time to collect payment, and it just wasn't a great idea. So we created a concept called GPay. It's the industry's first online escrow service. Very quickly, the buyers pay up front. GFresh holds the money on trust. We notify the supplier to say money is good. The supplier ships the goods out. GFresh takes the goods, separates it, delivers it. We do an inspection service there on the spot, and then the funds are deposited to your bank account. This whole process from when you ship the goods to getting paid is around 2 to 3 business days. Compare that to the traditional model, which used to take 30, 40, 60 days. You have a lot of extra cash flow to work with now. So suppliers generally quite like this model. So up until this point, we've done hundreds of millions of dollars of trade, not a single unpaid transaction. There's zero forex risk because we've hedged everything, and it eliminates the need for things like credit insurance or trade insurance to facilitate your transactions. And all that together, everything I've just said, is what we call the GFresh integrated B2B platform solution. Very, very convoluted name, but that's basically just the status quo now for platforms in China. GFresh is obviously the largest platform, but there are many platforms that do similar kinds of services to what we provide. And what that means for a seafood exporter is that it's an extremely simple and direct way to reach the Chinese market. So just at least for GFresh, this is what we've seen so far. 12,000 Chinese buyers and growing quite rapidly. 1,000 global suppliers selling their products on GFresh. Some of them, Tassel was a recently signed up seller. A few of the largest companies in the world, such as Marine Harvest, use GFresh actively to sell. But also some of the smallest companies in the world depend on GFresh as their primary sales channel. For several key live products, such as the American-Canadian gooey duck, lobsters, Dungeness crab, GFresh is now the main sales channel. So over 50% of all these products now go through GFresh than the offline channel. In terms of our platform sales growth, we just entered into our 3rd year, but we're looking at around 3 billion RMB in sales this year, so you just divide that by 5 to get Australian dollars. So we're seeing very rapid growth. So that's GFresh. But what's even more interesting, I think, is B2C platforms, right? These platforms are used by individual consumers to purchase from these wholesalers. There are over 4,000 B2C platforms in China. But the main ones you'll see here, it's Tmall by Alibaba, and there's JD.com, right? And each of these have their own spin-off, smaller subsidiary companies or startups that they've invested in. GFresh is one of them. But the main two players in this space is Alibaba's Tmall and JD.com. Records right now are just being smashed seemingly on a daily basis. So we partnered up with JD.com recently, and we did a lobster promotion, and it just smashed the daily sales record for China. In fact, JD's Fresh division reported that they'd experienced 14-fold increases in sales this year alone. So GFresh is integrating quite heavily with a lot of these B2C platforms to bring your products to these platforms and then to the end consumer. One of the most interesting developments is a concept called new retail. And you may or may not have heard it yet, but it's an extremely big topic in China right now. It's coined by Jack Ma, Alibaba's founder, and it's best shown in a new store called Hema, which is Chinese for hippopotamus. This was their recent ad campaign that came out this week. In Shanghai, one of the most heavily trafficked Shanghai stations, they put all this artwork to make it look like the ocean that you're walking through there. And they've recently opened about a dozen of these super convenience stores throughout China. And what they enable you to do is that a big part of all these stores, and they're all imported products, all premium end products. And a big part of every store is the live seafood area. So in every store you go to, there's around 50% of the floor space, I would say, would be the live seafood tanks. And there's experienced salespeople on hand, and consumers can go there, find out about the seafood, and actually purchase it. And they do so by scanning a QR code that's embedded next to the seafood product. So if you're looking at, for instance, a rock lobster, you have no idea as a Chinese consumer what the hell a rock lobster is, how to eat it, where it came from, how long it took to get here. But when you scan this QR code, the entire story of whoever brought that lobster into China is shown. There's traceability, and you also get things like how do you eat it, what do you eat it with, et cetera, et cetera. And not only that, through that app, you can actually place an order, and it goes to a kitchen where a chef prepares everything for you on site. And like I said, on-site chef. So that's Jack Ma eating, I believe, a crab. But this is perhaps one of the most interesting developments in China for a way a consumer would actually discover something and actually purchase something and share something through their social media channels. In fact, most customers, after going through one of the Hema stores, don't return. They actually place orders through their mobile app. And anywhere within Shanghai, your product can be cooked and delivered to you within 30 minutes. So what you see when you go to a Hema store, if you ever go there, you'll see a big retail store, but the bigger part is the warehouse behind it, right? And this is their recent new store. This is people going nuts over some of the seafood. So what that means then, in conclusion, is that a lot is happening in China's e-commerce landscape. And GFresh is really there to almost act as a bridge for you to engage with these different B2C platforms as well. Not only now can you, if we were having this discussion 1 year ago, I would just be talking about the restaurant sector and the retail sector, and that'd be it. But not only can you now sell to the restaurants, you can also, through GFresh, integrate with JD.com, integrate with Tmall, integrate with Hema, and a wide range of other B2C platforms through one single channel. And that's where we think a lot of the most interesting opportunities will exist. So in conclusion, it's never been easier to build your brand in China. It's never been easier to tell your story to millions of people seemingly overnight with what's happening with social media over there. It's never been easier to reach your customers directly and regularly. It's never been easier to deliver fresh seafood to consumers and, of course, get paid for doing that. So this is just the beginning, and we're very excited to be part of it. Thank you very much.